Time for Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Inside the Birds podcast is out with Jeff Mosher and Adam Kaplan. Football at 4 is brought to you by PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now. They'll match your first deposit up to $250. Go to PlaySugarHouse.com. Win real money with their sports book, along with casino games from the comfort of your home. You must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. I was pulling up yesterday, and Josh got here at the same time as me. He had Inside the Birds blaring in his car.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was listening to, like, AC/DC or something.
Well, that's the way you got to do it.
Just really loud. Mosher and Kaplan screaming really loud at you.
That's what I do for my alarm.
CJ Ortega Whiteside!
That's what I do for my alarm clock. I set it to the podcast, so when I wake up, it's just them screaming at me.
Is that how it goes?
Yeah, sometimes I do game night with Josh Hennick.
The podcast?
Yeah, so Josh is just screaming at me at 7 in the morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, that's something to do. Let's bring in Andrew Dicecco, Dicecco NFL Happy Hour Friday. He joins us here. We are 2 weeks away from the football season. Tonight or yesterday, Andrew, would have been the final NFL preseason game. We would have been at week 4 of the preseason, but no preseason game, so we got a lot different perspective. So let's start with what the team looks like today with Andre Dillard not playing left tackle. What is the anticipation for who will be over there? Do we have an answer today?
Well, it's kind of crazy to think that over the last 2 months, the Eagles have lost, 40% of their starting offensive line. Obviously, Andre Dillard was having an inconsistent training camp, but he was showing room for improvement in pass protection and one-on-ones particularly. In team drills, he was kind of up and down. But you know what? This is a pivotal season for him, obviously, and now he's not going to have – he only played in 4 games last season. Now he's obviously not going – he's going to be out for the entire 2020 season. And then the question becomes, what happens with Andre Dillard next year? Because then all of a sudden you're going into your 3rd season, you're 25 years old, you only have 4 starts under your belt. You almost have to bring Jason Peters back just for an insurance policy. So obviously Jason Peters is probably going to slide into his left tackle post, and Matt Pryor right now would be the right guard.
So Peters most likely at left, Pryor at guard. Kind of what, we thought could happen in the offseason anyway. Many people thought that Pryor would replace Brooks once he went down, and that if the Eagles brought Peters back, it would be to play left tackle, not right guard. So I'll ask you, is this a good enough offensive line to be a playoff team?
As of right now, I would actually argue that having Jason Peters at left tackle gives them an advantage. And Matt Pryor is going to do just fine at right guard, even though he's only played 79 snaps at the NFL level. But yes, it's a starting caliber offensive line. But you're an injury or two away from it being a very pedestrian line. They're going to run into some problems, because when you look at the depth behind the starting unit, you have guys that, I guess if you comprise their stats, they've only had three snaps total, and that's Nate Herbig last season. So they're going to be in some trouble if any of those guys get hurt. And obviously, as we know, Jason Peters has a history of coming in and out of games, especially this at 38 years old. That's probably going to happen. So I do anticipate them. They have to probably go get a veteran offensive lineman. There's not much out there. You could possibly look to the waiver wire when final cuts are being made, but I cannot see them going into the start of the season with the current depth group that they have.
What do you think Jordan Mailata's role is going to be? I know they're intrigued by him, but he has no experience. But if something happens down the road, is he going to be utilized in some big moments?
I often phrase this to people this way, because I get asked about Jordan Mailata a lot. Say something happened at left tackle during a game, and you need to put Jordan Mailata in there to protect Carson Wentz's blind side against the Chase Youngs of the world. You wouldn't feel very confident throwing him out there. And this is going to be now, year 3 for Jordan? He's a guy that really needs a lot of snaps in order to become the player that the Eagles think that he can be. And, in 2018, he ended his season on IR. In 2019, he ended his season on IR. And he began this season on the COVID list when, it was an already abbreviated offseason to begin with. So he's a guy that really would have benefited from the preseason and the OTAs to really see where he stands. But if I'm the Eagles right now, I'm extremely hesitant before putting Jordan Mailata into a game.
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't know what to think about what his future holds for them. Do they look at him as a starter? Have they kind of just realized, is he going to be like a Vitae, a swing guy? I think that whole Mailata story is still very incomplete.
Yes, definitely. And he's still very much a work in progress. The question just becomes, how long are they willing to wait on that experiment? Because this is now year 3, and they're likely not going to feel confident enough to put him into a game. So that's a third season in which he's really not going to see the field. So at what point do you have to realize, okay, maybe it's time to cut the cord, because we really need to bring in guys that can play and can contribute right now in the event of injury.
Andrew Dicecco, Football at 4, right here on the Sports Bash. So Dillard's out. Peters looks like he'll be at left tackle, and you mentioned Matt Pryor at right guard. So the Eagles' offensive line, that's what it looks like here. I want to get your take then on the running back situation, because Miles Sanders has kind of been out. You wrote about Adrian Killins the other day, and I'm wondering if there's room for a guy like that on the roster. Has he made enough of an impression to kind of make the Eagles figure out what to do with him? And is there anybody else that has put them in position to have to think twice about?
Well, the way I see it playing out, Mike, is you have Miles Sanders, Boston Scott. They're kind of entrenched into the 1 and 2 role. Corey Clement has the inside track to get the third role. He looks explosive, and Miles Sanders actually said that he looks like he's returning to Super Bowl Corey. And obviously that he can create yards between the tackles, which is really what they would need for that third running back. Then the question becomes, do they keep 4? Has any guy really stood out enough for them to warrant keeping 4 running backs? And I don't necessarily know that you could make that argument. You have a guy like Elijah Holyfield, and who's kind of flashed at moments. You have Mike Warren, who really hasn't had a lot of time, a lot of opportunities to really show what he could do. And then you have Adrian Killins, who he nicknamed AK, which is usually a good indication that they anticipate him sticking around in some capacity. But he's very small. He's generously listed at 5'8", 177. When I saw him at the Shrine Bowl, he was about 160 pounds. There's no denying his electricity with the football in his hands. He's extremely fast. He can cut on a dime and really, add another layer to the offense. But can you justify keeping a 4th running back that's a gadget player that would only play a handful of snaps a game, or would he be better served on the practice squad? And maybe you kind of yank him, you kind of promote him and take advantage of that 55-man roster expansion during the season. And I think the fact that there has been no preseason, it would kind of play into the Eagles' hands as far as getting some of these guys through waivers.
I want to go back to the offensive line real quick. Jason Peters at 38, playing 16 games. It just seems like it's totally not going to happen. So do you think it's possible Lane Johnson goes to left tackle if needed? And if so, who would then slide in the right tackle position?
Well, as you kind of have seen from Jeff Stoutland, he doesn't really like to move. A lot of guys have played musical chairs on the offensive line, if you will. A name that you may see or could be a potential option is Isaac Seumalo. He has the ability to play left tackle. I was speaking to the Oregon State tight end coach who was there when Isaac was there, and he said, he can play center, he can play guard, he can even play left tackle if you needed him to. That's something to keep an eye on. But I really do think that obviously Jason Peters, like you said, he's not going to play 16 games. That's just not going to happen. If he played 12 or 13, I consider that a win. They're going to probably have to make a trade here to facilitate a trade from maybe there's a veteran who's on the fringe of making some other roster, and maybe somebody that Joe Douglas might be able to give the Eagles on something of a discount. But I do think that they have to do something there, because when you look at the depth, you have Jordan Mailata, you have the Jack Driscolls, you have the Nate Herbigs, the Luke Jurigas, the Sua Opetas. They haven't played a single snap in the NFL, and I think it would be utter negligence for the Eagles to move forward with that contingent as the depth.
Hey, a couple of years ago when Desean Jackson was here the first time, he really isn't a number one. I would always say he's not a number one wide receiver, but he's a number one playmaker. If he's your best guy, what is your wide receiving? Is your wide receiving core good enough if Desean Jackson's your best?
I think that it certainly can be. And you look at the 2013 season when he was the Eagles' best receiver, and that was his best season of his career. If he can stay healthy, that's the key right there. If he can stay healthy, if he can remain on the field, give the Eagles 12 or 13 games, and play at the level that he showed that he could play at the season opener last year against Washington when he scored 2 touchdowns over the top. If he can be that Desean Jackson, yes, I think he can be good. The Eagles receiving corps can be good enough. The problem is he's not likely to. History has shown that he's not likely to play all 16 games or even maybe 13 or 14 games. He's going to suffer a lot of nicks and bruises along the way, as he has. That is where the depth really takes the hit, because you have Alshon Jeffrey, who has suffered injuries over the past couple of seasons. He might not. He likely won't even be back until the early part of the season anyway, coming off a Lisfranc injury. Then you're asking guys like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Jalen Reagor, and Greg Ward to really step up. And I don't necessarily know that those players are ready to do that for a multitude of reasons. Greg Ward's more of a limited slot player. He's going to move the chain and catch the football. He can't really be a number one. He was kind of thrust into that role last season. JJ has had a strong training camp, but it needs to translate onto the field. Too many times we've been fooled by training camp performances, and they never really materialized in the regular season. You look at Shelton Gibson as an example, or Mac Hollins. So I do think that, he's good enough. But, if there's an injury there, it could become a house of cards.
Yeah, when I look at Desean, he's not that guy who's going to catch 95, 100 balls. He's not the chain mover. He's not that kind of guy. You need a complement to him to make it all work, and you wonder if the pieces around him are the right. For him to be the best guy, he needs complementary guys around him. Do they have the right complementary guys? I guess we don't know, but do you like the way they've built this around Desean Jackson?
Yeah, I do like it, and I know a lot of it is they're counting on Alshon Jeffrey coming back and being that go up and get it receiver, that above the rim guy that can really thrive in the red zone. And they're also banking on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside taking that next step in his sophomore season and being the player that they drafted him to be, which is come up with contested catches, attack the football in the air. They're kind of hitching their wagons to a couple of these guys, and a lot of things really need to go right for the receiving corps to kind of materialize the way that they anticipated it. But I do like it's intriguing the way that they built it around Desean, because there's a lot of speed around him. But on a shortened off season, I think it's important for everyone to understand that you need to temper your expectation with these young receivers. As good as Jalen Reagor has looked in training camp, playing it in the regular season and lining up against, a top corner, that's an entirely different he's going to see coverages he's never seen before. These are things that you need to keep in mind during the early slate of games here, because there's going to be a growing pains for a lot of these young receivers, with John Hightowers and the like.
Now that you're seeing guys like Hargrave, Dillard, Avery go down, do you think this is the nature of the environment of the shortened offseason and the wonkiness of the training camp, or do you think that this is just the nature of the game of football? Because it does seem like, year after year, they try and change this with the medical staff, a new doctor, or whatever the case may be, and it just keeps happening and happening. And I wonder if it's just the way sports science is going, with less pads or not hitting as much. So when you do go out there, like the way that they keep it soft for these players, it's forcing more injuries. Do you think it's just the environment this year, or is it the nature of the game in general?
That's an interesting question, Hunter, and that's a question that I've gotten fairly often as these injuries have kind of compiled. And if you look around the NFL, there's been a ton of injuries, and I think that can be directly attributed to the shortened off season. You could work out, you could run hills, you can catch footballs, and you can do all these different football activities. But that's all good and well, but you can't replicate getting on the field, getting that actual grass time. Going against a teammate. And you kind of saw that. You look back 2 years ago when Des Bryant, he was out of the NFL, and he looked good on the Instagram videos. He's doing all kinds of drills. He's running routes and all that. And then his first practice with the Saints, unfortunately, he tore his Achilles, because you've been out of the games for so long that when you actually have to do football-related things, your body's not necessarily acclimated to it. And I think that when they're trying to cram, the NFL is trying to cram so much in a handful of weeks, and I think a lot of people's bodies maybe aren't necessarily ready for that, and that's why you're seeing a lot of injuries.
Andrew, defensive side of the ball, you got Jim Schwartz, obviously talked about the competition at all three spots in the secondary. He mentioned Avonte Maddox, Sidney Jones. He seems to think that Jones, who's hurt again, by the way, that Maddox has won that deal, that spot. Roby Coleman seems like he has won the nickel spot there. What does the safety spot look like next to Rodney McLeod, though?
I think you're going to see Jaylen Mills in that role. Jaylen Mills he's a leader in the secondary along with McLeod. He's a very smart football player. Was he limited in a cornerback role? Yes. He doesn't have that long speed, that makeup speed, but he scans the field. He's instinctive. And I think that when the Eagles there's a comfortability there with, when you have a player like Jaylen Mills that has been in the system since 2016, I think there's the familiarity with Jim Schwartz, and they know that they know what he's going to bring each and every week. And I think that obviously Will Parks is going to have a big role. I think he's going to move into that big nickel role, and they're going to use him in a myriad of ways. But I do think that at least in the early going, Jaylen Mills will be the starting safety.
Do you think it's possible that Sidney Jones doesn't even make the team?
I do, and actually, I had this conversation with Josh yesterday on game night. I think the Eagles have kind of reached the point now where they've given this guy opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, and since 2017, and the Achilles injury can't really be a thing anymore because he's 3 years removed from that, and he's been too inconsistent on the field for them to feel comfortable with him, and he's struggled with injuries. And I think that they're probably at this point got to be like, we've seen all we can from this guy. We've given him every opportunity. It just hasn't materialized. What can we do? What can we do with Sidney Jones? And I think that when you get to the final cutdowns, he might be a guy that maybe the Eagles look to pawn him off for a late round pick and just kind of cut bait with him, or they could always keep him as the sixth. But you have to look at their top four cornerback roles are already etched in stone, right? And then when you get to the fifth role, you have Rasul Douglas versus Sidney Jones. What does Rasul Douglas do that Sidney Jones doesn't? He plays special teams, and he can play on all special teams phases. He's going to be active on game day. Do you keep Sidney? Is it worth keeping a player like Sidney Jones as your sixth corner and inactive on game day? I think that they might be better served maybe trying to flip him for a late-round pick, and maybe another team thinks that they can get something out of him and kind of revitalize his career.
I know that when we started Football at 4 with you, we looked at a lot of the under-the-radar guys, the draft. We were right about that time. You were a big fan of Casey Toohill, if memory serves. What are his possibilities, and does he have a shot to make this team? And by the way, Dante Olson got released the other day.
Yeah. It's Dante Olson, before I get into Casey Toohill, I know you liked him. I know Jeff has mentioned him being, the tackling machine. I think that he's another player that would have benefited greatly from a preseason. It's hard to stand out when you're buried on the depth chart. You're always getting a handful of reps, especially as a linebacker who doesn't run very well. I think he would have been a guy that you can get him in there in live action. You kind of see what he can do. And there's also the possibility he can return on the practice squad, but it's kind of very telling that they were willing to move on from him this early and leave the team with only six linebackers. But, moving into Casey Toohill, yes, he's a guy that when I was at the Shrine Bowl, I remember from across the field, I see this undersized defensive end just powering through these massive offensive tackles. And as I'm watching the receivers, so I walk over and get a closer look, and I see that the guy is Casey Toohill. He's outmatched every single rep, but what he does have is an incredibly high motor. He's fast. He's aggressive. He's just going to keep coming at you. And he was just overpowering guys with his bull rush and his tenacity. And I thought that if he could get into a training camp, that effort would show. And he would be a guy that could possibly be a special teams core member and one of those guys that just kind of flies around on kickoff and things like that. And from the reports that I've gotten, he was outplaying Jannard Avery, and he was outplaying Sharif Miller, and he was right up there with the Joe Ostman. So he just needs to carry that over and kind of see where it goes, because it's still very open for that fifth role, and we're kind of going to see how that shakes out.
The Eagles brought back Trevor Williams. Is there anything really to that? What do you think that move was all about?
I think that was more so to add depth because Sidney Jones has been banged up, and they just wanted to add maybe get another look at him as a potential practice squad guy. I thought it was very telling that when they released him, no other team really made a move for him. It was kind of puzzling. I don't really understand the whole thought process behind that because he does have a number of starts under his belt. So if he wasn't injured, it really didn't make sense to kind of move on from him. But it just could be just doing some more due diligence and get another body in there and have him line up in practice against your receivers and use his length and experience. But he's still a long shot to make the football team.
Any insight on what Jalen Hurts has looked like as a quarterback?
The reports that I've heard he's looked pretty smooth, and just his athleticism just shines through on every snap. And you could tell that he has this poise about him and the way he carries himself. He's going to be just fine. As far as the backup quarterback spot, I think we talked about that. I think that obviously they want him to be the 3 and Nate Sudfeld to be the 2. Nate just has to be more consistent in that regard.
All right, we got, of course, about 2 weeks to go before the opener, and September 10th is when the NFL season kicks off, and the Eagles, of course, that first Sunday, we'll have it right here on 97.3 ESPN, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and we'll have plenty more leading up as the Eagles' 53-man roster trying to take shape, and we will continue to keep our eyes on that. Monday's edition Jeff Mosher is back, and Andrew is back on Tuesday. Thank you, pal. Have a good weekend.
You too, guys. Take care.